Welcome to the NC Everything Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining me. And if this is your 100 and something time listening, thank you for coming back. We're heading for the hills again in this episode because I'm going to tell you about Black Mountain. And Black Mountain, it sounds like something kind of scary out of a fantasy novel. You know, like stay away from Black Mountain. You know it lives up there. But the truth is, Black Mountain is just like any other town. Well, I hope it's not just like any other town. I hope it stands out like most towns in North Carolina. But it's certainly nothing ominous or super dangerous about Black Mountain. Normally this is where I'll throw in the links, but I'm going to put that toward the end of the episode. So I want to kind of start speeding up when I get into the content. I had a commenter complain that I talk too much, which is weird because this is a podcast. It's a talking show. But in an effort to try to please my listeners, I'm going to put the links at the end of the episode. So Black Mountain, it's a town on the eastern edge of Buncombe County, and it's about 15 miles east of Asheville. Now, like every episode, we're going to just kind of go through the history. That's what this is, a history podcast. But I do want to say going in, I've never actually stopped in Black Mountain. I've passed through Black Mountain many times on the way to Jackson County, but I've never stopped in, and mostly because it's usually 3:30, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning when I'm coming through there, because I really do enjoy seeing the sunrise in Jackson County. So a lot of times when I'm coming through Buncombe County, I'm hauling ass to get to Jackson County. No offense, Buncombe County. Anyway, Black Mountain history. Before the European settlers, and this is typical with most North Carolina history, especially mountain history, but before the Europeans showed up, the Cherokee people lived in what we now call Black Mountain. In fact, most of the roads that we use today that used to be Cherokee trading paths. I actually read somewhere one time, it was kind of cool, you know, and it's no surprise, but a lot of deer trails and animal trails turned into Native American trails, which turned into European trading paths, eventually became roads. And some of those roads are now part of our major roads, including Interstate 40. Now, in 1540, when the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto came through, that's when the Native Americans had their first contact with Europeans. Now, you fast forward several years, several hundred years. Well, I'd say 100 some years. I didn't do the math. But Jamestown Colony has been established. There's settlers all up and down the coast of North Carolina and Virginia. People are starting to spread out, starting to get populated. So Scottish and English settlers, they start moving into the mountain area that we would eventually call Black Mountain. And this is around the 1700s. Now, the reason they started moving here, and there's a lot of, I could talk for a long time about why, especially the Scottish moved here. I actually have an episode on Scots in North Carolina. I don't remember which episode that is. But the main attraction for North Carolina was farming. That's what you did back then. That's how you survived. And there's a lot of rich, fertile farming land up in the mountains. Now, you know, one farm becomes a dozen farms. That dozen farms becomes a community. That community becomes a town. And that's how Black Mountain really got started. Now, I keep saying, you know, we eventually called it Black Mountain. Originally, the area that we eventually called Black Mountain was called Gray Eagle or Dark Mountain. I think some of the Native Americans did call it Black Mountain, so it kind of depended on who you talked to, whether it was Black Mountain, Dark Mountain, or Gray Eagle. Now let's talk about county seats, and this has come up in other episodes before. You have to go to the county seat to pay your taxes or do any kind of business. And early on in North Carolina's history, a lot of these counties were humongous. Orange County, for example, was the size of probably 9 or 10 of our counties now. And so when you wanted to go to the county seat, you had a long way to go. And so what happens is a lot of the residents complain. This is over the years, and this is Black Mountain too. A lot of residents complain about how far it is to the county seat. And so they form new counties, put the county seat in the middle of it, and now you're closer to the county seat. So up here in the Black Mountain area or Gray Eagle area, the residents up there, they had to go to Rutherford, Burke, or Wilkes counties to take care of their tax business. And of course, if you've been to the mountains any amount of time, even today, some of the roads it's hard to navigate. So you can imagine back in 1790 how hard it was to get many, many, many miles across these mountains to your county seat. So of course they complained, and they started going to the legislature and asking, for a new county to be formed. And that's how Buncombe and Ashe counties were formed in 1792 and 1799, respectively. And they made the county seat of Buncombe County a town called Morristown. And Morristown would eventually become Asheville. Then came the gold. They discovered gold in western North Carolina. And of course, this was in the 1820s. And of course, everybody started pouring in to the mountains. And it was during this time that North Carolina became a leading gold producing state. And of course, there was a gold rush down toward Mecklenburg. I covered that in North Carolina Gold Rush. But this is a separate, I'm not sure about the timeline there, but this is considered a separate gold rush. And of course, when they discovered gold in California in the 1840s, all the gold attention in North Carolina turned to the west. Now, I talked about how hard it was to navigate and get across the mountains to your county seat. They did form Buncombe County, and the county seat changed. That helped as far as the distance goes, but it really didn't help travel in general. But in 1827, they built the Buncombe Turnpike, and this completely overhauled traveling in that area. And this turnpike pretty much went from Greenville, Tennessee to Greenville, South Carolina. And what the turnpike did, it wasn't just this cool road that they now had out here. A lot of the farms, if they wanted to trade goods, it was very localized because of the poor roads. But this turnpike, it opened up a lot of commerce. Now, these mountain folks, they could, go anywhere between Tennessee and South Carolina to trade crops, livestock. It was, and if you've been in the mountains, you know how curvy the roads are. It was a whole lot easier to navigate this road. It made traveling easier for everybody, which, of course, commerce, that means more money. That means more people coming in, more people going out. And that's, I guess, if you're trying to build a town, that's never a bad thing. And then, 1879, here comes the railroad. So now you got this really badass turnpike, and now the railroad's here. Now, the railroad, that really brought the tourists. I think there were tourists coming up using the turnpike, but the trains really brought the tourists in. And with tourists, they need somewhere to stay. So that's when they started building boarding houses, inns, hotels, restaurants. But also in this area, a lot of religious retreats popped up. Some of the more famous ones now is the YMCA Blue Ridge Assembly, Ridgecrest, and Montreat. Montreat, I actually know more about. I know a lot of people who've been up to Montreat. Now, the next big thing in Black Mountain was the Industrial Revolution. So where everybody's been, relying on farming, livestock, and crops, now you have factories. Factories started popping up. People started coming up to work in these factories. And that may not sound like a good thing, but what it did, it caused, because you had so many people coming up to work in these factories, to live in these towns, the town was forced to really upgrade its infrastructure. So the ultimate result was better roads, better housing, better schools, better everything. And that brings us to the year 1893. That's when Black Mountain was actually incorporated. And so, remember, it was called Dark Mountain, Black Mountain, or Gray Eagle, depending on who you talk to. The train had come in. They decided I jumped ahead, and they decided they needed to come up with a permanent name for the area. The train had come in, and they were already calling the train depot Black Mountain. And so that's the name they decided to go with. And so the town charter for Black Mountain was ratified on March 4th, 1893. And, I can hardly do a history episode without talking about a fire. Everything I talk about burns. So in 1912, the town caught on fire, and a bunch of the original wooden buildings burnt completely down, were completely destroyed. Some of the brick buildings, they remained, but a big portion of the town burnt down. But like with every other fire I talk about on this episode, it didn't take them too long to build the town back up. In 1933, the famous Black Mountain College opened up. And this school, it wasn't like other schools of its time. It was a liberal arts school. So it didn't just draw in kids trying to further their education. It brought in and attracted some of the most creative minds in our state at that time. And that's really all I have on Black Mountain. I wanted to look more modern, but to be honest, the town it didn't grow a whole lot after that. The town of Black Mountain, it looks very similar to the way it did in the 40s and 50s. It's a small town. It's kind of a really cool place. It doesn't look necessarily like you stepped into a different period, but the town didn't really blow up like Asheville did. I know now the town's full of breweries, a bunch of restaurants. There's a Buncombe County History Museum. There's plenty to do up there, but the town itself didn't explode. Like I said, I normally go through there at 4 o'clock in the morning. I got a friend who spent 2 or 3 days in Black Mountain. She was there on vacation and she loved it. So at some point, I really do need to go and spend some time and walk around the town. I've done it in plenty of other towns. Silva, Bryson City is one of my favorites, Brevard, but I've never walked around Black Mountain. So it's definitely on my bucket list. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want more NC Everything content, check the links below. There's a link for the Facebook group where I try to post as much as I can, but it comes kind of in waves. Sometimes I get super busy. There's a link to the YouTube channel if you're listening on a podcast player where you can put a face with the name. Or if you just want to listen on a podcast player, I can be found on most of them. Spotify's the big one. Apple Podcasts is the other one. Or Apple Pod, I don't remember what it's called. But I can be found on most podcast players. Also in the links below is a link to Tasting NC, a show I do with my wife where we taste everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. And the contact information is down there. You can contact me at thenceverythingpodcast@gmail.com. You can say hello, suggest an episode. Just reach out and let me know what you think of the show. I love hearing from you. But anyway, it's about time for me to pack up and get ready to go to work. My schedule's changed a little bit. So thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.